It was a bright morning at Atlanta Airport. People were lining up at Gate 34, waiting to board Flight 726 to New York. Children were laughing, old couples were holding hands, and busy businessmen were checking their phones. Everyone seemed calm and excited to reach their destination. Among the passengers stood a tall black man in a clean Army uniform. His name was Sergeant Marcus Lee. His uniform was pressed, his boots were polished. He looked tired, but there was strength in his eyes. He had just returned from a long mission overseas. He was going home to see his mother after 2 years. In his hand, he held a small photo of his family. His mother had sent it to him during his time at war. As the boarding began, Marcus smiled at the flight attendant and quietly walked to his seat. Seat 14C, an aisle seat near the middle of the plane. He sat down, placed his small bag under the seat, and closed his eyes for a moment. It had been a long journey. Then a loud voice broke the peace. "Excuse me? I'm not sitting here." Everyone turned to look. A woman, about 50 years old, wearing a fancy coat and expensive shoes, was standing in the aisle. Her face was red with anger. She was holding her boarding pass in one hand and pointing to Marcus with the other. "This is my seat," she said loudly, "but I'm not sitting next to him." Marcus opened his eyes slowly. He looked at her calmly. He didn't say a word. The flight attendant came quickly. "Ma'am, is something wrong?" The woman replied, "Yes, very wrong. I cannot sit next to this man. Find me another seat." The passengers nearby looked confused. Some looked angry. A young boy whispered to his mother, "Why is she shouting at the soldier?" The flight attendant stayed professional. She said, "Ma'am, we are almost full. Let me check, but please take your seat for now." The woman crossed her arms. "This is unacceptable. I don't feel safe next to him. I've seen the news. I know what people like him do." The words hit hard. Some people gasped. A man across the aisle pulled out his phone and started recording. Marcus still stayed quiet. He didn't fight back. He looked down at the photo in his hand. His mother's smile gave him peace. The flight attendant returned. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. There are no extra seats in economy. We can move you to business class if a seat opens up after takeoff." The woman frowned. "No, he should move, not me." Still, Marcus didn't speak. He simply said in a soft voice, "I'm just trying to get home, ma'am." The woman scoffed. "Home? Sure. After who knows what you've done overseas." Now, the plane was silent. Everyone could hear her. A young woman in the next row looked at Marcus and whispered, "I'm so sorry you have to deal with this." Marcus gave a small, tired smile. "It's okay," he said. Then, the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are preparing for takeoff. Please take your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The woman finally sat down, but she kept glancing at Marcus with a look of fear and judgment. She held her purse tightly, as if she expected something bad to happen. Marcus looked out the window. His hands were still, his breath was calm, but inside he was remembering another moment. A battlefield. A friend who didn't make it. A promise he made to stay kind, no matter what. The plane started moving. The engines roared. The flight attendants did the safety instructions. Everyone was quiet. Too quiet. As the plane rose into the air, light turbulence shook the cabin. The woman suddenly grabbed Marcus's arm without thinking. She was scared. Marcus turned to her slowly. She realized what she had done and quickly pulled her hand back. "Don't touch me," she said sharply. He said nothing. He just nodded and returned his eyes to the window. After a few minutes, the turbulence stopped. The flight became smooth again. The woman reached for the flight attendant call button. When the attendant came, she whispered something. The attendant looked surprised, but nodded and walked away. No one knew, but the woman had just used the airline's messaging system to contact ground authorities. She told them there was a suspicious black man in uniform on board. She said she didn't feel safe. Back in the cabin, other passengers were whispering. Some were recording quietly. Some looked sad. A few had tears in their eyes, not because of fear, but because of how wrong everything felt. A little girl turned to her father and asked, "Daddy, why is the soldier being treated like that? He looks nice." Her father didn't answer. He just shook his head. As the plane flew through the clouds, the woman stared straight ahead, proud of what she had done. Marcus leaned back in his seat and closed his eyes. He whispered so softly that only he could hear, "Stay calm. Stay strong." He didn't know what was waiting at the airport, but someone would be waiting, and this flight was not going to end the way anyone expected. The plane flew smoothly now, but inside the cabin, the air felt heavy. People were whispering, eyes shifting between the woman and the quiet soldier beside her. Sergeant Marcus Lee sat still in his seat. He had seen war, he had seen pain, but this silent judgment from a fellow American, it felt different. It cut deeper. The woman beside him refused to look at him now. She kept her arms crossed, her lips tight, her eyes full of cold anger. But every few minutes she would glance at Marcus, her face hard, like he didn't belong there. Across the aisle, a young woman named Lena was recording everything on her phone. She had captured the woman's loud outburst, her rude remarks, and now the cold silence that followed. Lena felt it in her heart. What was happening was not right. A few rows back, a businessman leaned toward the passenger beside him and whispered, "Can you believe this? He's a soldier. And she's treating him like a criminal." Another woman nodded. "Some people just don't see the truth, even when it's right in front of them." Marcus didn't move. He looked out the window at the clouds, remembering better days. He remembered his first day in uniform, how proud his mother was. He remembered the letters from his little sister, calling him her hero. He held on to those memories because right now, nothing around him felt fair. Then, the woman beside him spoke again. "Don't think you're a hero just because you wear a uniform," she said in a low, sharp voice. "I know what your kind really do." Marcus turned his head slowly. His voice was calm but firm. "I don't expect you to understand, ma'am, but I still fought for your right to sit here and say that." The woman looked shocked for a moment. She didn't expect him to reply. He turned back to the window. The clouds outside were soft, peaceful, the opposite of what was happening inside. A few seats ahead, a small girl tugged her mother's sleeve and asked, "Mom, why is that lady being mean to the soldier?" Her mother whispered back, "Because some people forget how to be kind." Suddenly, a male voice from a few rose up, said loudly, "That man has more courage in one finger than that woman ever will." Heads turned. People started clapping, slowly at first, then stronger. The woman turned red with anger. "This is harassment," she shouted. "He's making everyone uncomfortable." But no one believed her anymore. The flight attendant came. Again, this time with a serious look on her face. She bent down and whispered something to the woman. The woman looked nervous. Her hands shook a little. Marcus noticed, but said nothing. The flight attendant glanced at Marcus with a respectful nod and walked away. The woman asked, "What's going to happen when we land?" The attendant didn't answer. Tension grew. Far, above the ground in that small metal tube, the truth was no longer hidden. The passengers saw it. They felt it. The quiet dignity of a soldier and the loud fear of someone blinded by hate. Marcus leaned back. He had done nothing wrong, yet he could feel something building, something waiting on the ground. The woman had made a report. He knew how these things worked. Sometimes people listened to lies before they searched for the truth. He sighed and whispered a small prayer, not for himself, but for peace. The seatbelt light came on. The captain announced, "We'll be landing in 15 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts." As passengers obeyed, a few more looked at Marcus. One man said, "Thank you for your service, sir." Another added, "Don't let her get to you." Marcus nodded politely. His silence spoke louder than words. The woman sat stiffly now, holding her purse tight again. Her fingers tapped nervously on the armrest. She tried to act proud, but her fear was starting to show. The plane lowered toward the city. The ground came closer. The runway appeared. Marcus took a deep breath. He didn't know what would happen when the plane stopped. He only knew one thing. He would face it with the same strength he had shown in every battle. The tires touched the ground. The plane rolled to a stop. Everyone stayed seated, waiting for the doors to open. Then came a strange announcement. "Passengers, please remain seated for a few more minutes. Airport security will board shortly." Gasps filled the cabin. People looked around. The woman smiled. "I told you," she whispered to Marcus. "Now you'll see." Marcus didn't reply. He just looked straight ahead. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane. Their eyes scanned the rows. And then something surprising happened. They walked right past Marcus and stood in front of the woman. "Ma'am, we need you to come with us," one officer said firmly. Her smile vanished. "Me? Why?" "I reported him. He's the one who—" The officer interrupted her. "We have multiple witness reports and video. Recordings. You need to come with us." People began whispering. A few even clapped. The woman looked around in disbelief. "This is a mistake. I was only trying to protect everyone." The airplane was finally quiet. The woman who caused all the drama was now gone, escorted by airport security. Passengers began to stand, stretching their legs and reaching for their bags. But Sergeant Marcus Lee stayed seated. His hands rested on his knees. His eyes stared forward. His mind was far away. He should have been thinking about home. His mother waiting at the airport, her favorite peach cobbler in the oven, her warm hugs, but instead his thoughts were heavy. The woman's words echoed in his mind. People like him. "I don't feel safe. I know what your kind really do." He had heard those words before, not on the battlefield, but at home. And every time, they hurt more than bullets. Across the aisle, Lena, the young woman who recorded the video, walked up to Marcus. "Sir," she said gently, "I just want to say thank you for everything." Marcus looked up, surprised. "You don't have to thank me," he said softly. "I do," she replied. "You stayed calm. I don't know if I could have done that." She handed him a small slip of paper. "I uploaded the video. It's going viral. I wrote my number here in case you need someone to speak up. I won't stay silent." He nodded, grateful. As he stood and walked off the plane, people clapped softly again, this time not out of shock, but respect. At the gate, his mother was waiting. Tears ran down her face as she hugged him tight. "My baby," she whispered. "I missed you so much." "I missed you too, Mama," he replied, squeezing her back. She didn't know yet what had happened on that plane, but she could feel something was different. Something had shaken him. As they walked out together, someone shouted, "That's him! That's the soldier from the flight!" Phones were out. Cameras were rolling. Reporters were waiting outside. Marcus was shocked. "How do they know?" he asked. Lena's video had spread faster than wildfire. It had already reached millions. Headlines were popping up. "Black soldier harassed by woman on flight. Passengers defend him." "Hero in uniform remains calm in face of hate." "Justice for Marcus" was trending. That night, Marcus sat quietly in his childhood room. The walls still had posters from high school. A photo of him in basic training hung above his bed. His mom brought him tea and sat beside him. "You want to talk about it?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "A woman didn't want to sit next to me on the plane. Called me a threat, tried to have me arrested." His mother's face tightened. "Why?" He looked down. Because of my skin, because of my uniform, because of fear. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You did nothing wrong. You stood tall. That's what matters. But Marcus wasn't angry for himself. He was thinking about all the others. The ones who didn't wear a uniform, who couldn't prove they were safe, who got treated the same way and had no one to record it. He picked up his phone and opened social media. His face was everywhere. Messages flooded in. Thank you for your service, sir. We're sorry this happened to you. You are the kind of hero this country needs. But among those messages, one stood out. It was a private message from someone he didn't know. It simply read, "We need to talk. FBI." Meanwhile, Urban. A quiet office in Washington, D.C., FBI agent Rachel Monroe sat at her desk, watching the viral video. She had seen many cases of discrimination, but this one felt different. The woman in the video didn't just show fear, she showed patterned behavior. Controlled, practiced, and confident. Like she had done this before. Rachel typed quickly into her database. Name, Caroline Whitmore, age, 52. Address, suburban home in New Jersey. Employment, former HR manager, recently terminated. Past records, 3 previous complaints filed against. Minorities, all false, all dismissed. She frowned. 3 times before, she muttered. And now this. Rachel stood up and walked down the hall. This one isn't just about racism, she told her partner. It's about abuse of the system, false reports. We need to pay her a visit. Back in New Jersey, Caroline Whitmore sat at her kitchen table, drinking wine and scrolling through her phone. She was smiling at first until she saw the news. Her face was on every screen. Her name was trending. People were calling for her arrest. She dropped her glass. No, no, no. I was the victim, she whispered. They just don't understand. He scared me. He looked dangerous. But even she didn't believe her own words. Now. Her phone rang. She didn't answer. Then it rang again. And again. Messages poured in. Her job called. Her friends stopped replying. Then there was a knock at the door. She walked slowly toward it. When she opened it, 2 people stood there. In dark suits, Mrs. Whitmore, one said, showing a badge. We're with the FBI. We'd like to ask you some questions. Her face turned pale. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Back at Marcus's home, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from Lena. You're not alone. The world saw what happened, and now they're finally listening. Marcus looked out his window at the quiet street. He never wanted fame. He never wanted attention. He only wanted to serve his country and go home in peace. But now, things had changed, and deep down, he knew. This was only the beginning. The morning sun touched the roof of a quiet house in New Jersey. Birds chirped outside, but inside the house everything was still. Caroline Whitmore sat on her couch, frozen. She had just opened the door to find 2 FBI agents standing there. Ma'am, we're here regarding the flight you took 2 days ago, said Agent Rachel Monroe, holding her badge calmly. Caroline blinked, her face pale. Is this about the soldier? The second agent, Agent David Shaw, stepped forward. Yes, and it's also about the report you made to airport security. We'd like to talk about that. Caroline's voice trembled. I didn't do anything wrong. I was scared. He looked suspicious. I was just trying to protect the passengers. Rachel's eyes were steady. Ma'am, did you know that you triggered a security alert? That you accused a decorated American soldier of being dangerous? Without any evidence? Caroline's voice turned defensive. It was just a feeling. I have the right to report something if I feel unsafe, don't I? Agent Shaw pulled out a small tablet. He pressed play. It was the video from the plane, the one Lena had recorded. Caroline's voice echoed through the room. I'm not sitting next to him. People like him are dangerous. I know what your kind really do. Caroline covered her mouth. I didn't know anyone was recording. Rachel looked her in the eye. You have a history, ma'am. 3 similar complaints in the last 4 years. All against men and women of color. All false. Caroline's face crumbled. It wasn't because of race. I just didn't feel comfortable. You've hurt people with your lies, Rachel said. But this time, you targeted a soldier, and the world saw it. Caroline fell silent. The agents didn't arrest her. Not yet. But they made it clear. An investigation was now open. False reporting, hate-driven complaints, misuse of emergency services. Caroline sat back on the couch, shaking. Her world was beginning to fall apart. Meanwhile, Marcus was walking through a small park in his neighborhood. He needed air, space to breathe. The last few days had been overwhelming. Everywhere he went, people stared. Some shook his hand, some gave him free coffee, others wanted photos. But Marcus didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired. He sat on a bench, closed his eyes, and listened to the wind. For a moment, he let the sound wash over him. No cameras, no questions, no fear. Then his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something told him to pick up. "Hello?" he said. "Sergeant Marcus Lee?" came a woman's voice. "This is Agent Rachel Monroe with the FBI. I'd like to talk to you about the incident on your flight." Marcus straightened up. "I'm listening," he said. Back at the FBI office that afternoon, Marcus sat across from Rachel in a quiet interview room. He told her everything. What the woman said, how she acted, and how she tried to make him look like a threat. Rachel listened carefully. "Did you feel unsafe?" she asked. Marcus paused. "No, I've been through worse. But I felt disrespected. I felt small, and I knew if I had reacted, even a little, I might have been the one taken off that flight." Rachel nodded. "That's exactly why this matters." She shared what they had found. Caroline's past complaints, her pattern of false accusations, and her current employer now considering action against her. "She's not just rude," Rachel said. "She's dangerous, and we need to make sure this doesn't happen again." Marcus looked down. "I didn't want all this attention. I just wanted to get home." "I know," Rachel said gently, "but your silence, your calm, it showed something powerful, and now people are listening." Online, the story had now reached the national news. Morning talk shows played the video. Politicians commented. Civil rights groups issued statements. One channel showed a split screen, Marcus sitting quietly on the plane, and Caroline yelling beside him. Another ran the headline, "Flight of Truth," how one soldier's silence exposed a pattern of hate. Lena, the young woman who recorded the video, was now giving interviews. In every one, she said the same thing. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He didn't even speak at first. He just sat there, and that was enough to show the world what's really wrong. At Caroline's house, Caroline's world was collapsing. Her job had fired her. Her neighbors stopped talking to her. Reporters were outside her home. She looked in the mirror and barely recognized herself. "I'm the victim," she whispered. "They twisted everything." But even she knew that was a lie at Marcus's home. That evening, Marcus sat with his mother again. They watched the news in silence. After the report, she turned to him. "You proud of how you handled it?" The morning sun rose over America, but something different was in the air. It wasn't just another news day. It was the day the world knew Marcus Lee's name. Across phones, computers, and TVs, the video from Flight 726 played again and again. The woman's loud voice, the soldier's silence, the tension in the air, and the quiet strength of a man who said almost nothing. Millions watched it, and millions were angry. Online explosion on Twitter. The hashtag #IsIStandWithMarcus hit #1 in just hours. On TikTok, people made short videos defending him. Veterans, students, mothers, and even children. On Instagram, his picture in uniform was everywhere, and on YouTube, reaction videos poured in. This is what strength looks like. She tried to destroy his life with just one lie. The world needs more men like Marcus. Even celebrities shared the video. A famous actress posted, "He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He just held his ground. That's real courage." A football player tweeted, "I'd want him on my team, not just on the field, in life." Back at Marcus's house, Marcus sat at his kitchen table holding a warm mug of tea. He stared at his phone. Hundreds of unread messages. Calls from reporters, interviews, podcast invitations. His mother stood nearby, watching. "You all right, baby?" she asked gently. He nodded slowly. "I don't know how to feel. I didn't do anything. I just sat on a plane." His mother walked over, touched his shoulder. "Yes, but you didn't break. You showed grace when you could have shown anger." He looked at her. "Should I speak out now?" She smiled. "Maybe it's time." At the FBI office, Agent Rachel Monroe and Agent David Shaw sat in a conference room, reading through new reports. Rachel leaned forward. "We've got something new." David raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" Rachel clicked on her laptop. "Someone just came forward. A nurse from Michigan. She says Caroline filed a false complaint against her 2 years ago. Tried to get her fired." David whistled. "That makes 4 now," Rachel nodded. 4 complaints, all false, all targeting people of color, and all designed to ruin lives quietly. They looked at each other. This wasn't just about a flight anymore. This was about a pattern, a history of silent hate. Rachel said, "We're building a case. One strong enough to press charges for false reporting, public endangerment, and possibly civil rights violations." Caroline's world falls. Apart, Caroline Whitmore was now America's most disliked woman. Her photo was everywhere, not in honor, but in shame. She had lost her job. Her country club canceled her membership. People online found old posts, things she had said before, things that now showed her true mindset. She tried to delete her accounts, but it was too late. At the grocery store, people stared. Some whispered. One person shouted, "Shame on you!" Her neighbors stopped speaking to her. Her phone didn't ring anymore. She sat alone in her living room, curtains drawn, the TV off, and for the first time, she felt fear. Marcus speaks out later that week. Marcus finally agreed to do one interview. With a small veteran-run news podcast, he liked the host, trusted him. They sat outside under a tree. Simple setting. No lights, no makeup, no crowd. The host asked gently, "Marcus, what went through your mind on that plane?" Marcus thought for a moment, then answered slowly, "I've worn this uniform for 9 years. I've seen war. I've held dying brothers in my arms. I've carried wounded children from bombed streets. But on that flight," he paused, "I was reminded that sometimes the hardest battles are at home, not with guns, but with silence, with eyes that judge, with lies whispered in fear." The host nodded. "Why didn't you react?" Marcus looked into the camera. "Because I knew one wrong word, one raised voice, and I would become what she already believed I was." He looked down. "I didn't stay quiet because I was weak. I stayed quiet because I was strong." The video of his interview was posted online. It reached 10 million views in 2 days at a community center. The local high school invited Marcus to speak. He stood on a small stage looking at a group of teenagers sitting on folding chairs. He said, "I don't want you to grow up bitter. I want you to grow up better. Don't fight hate with hate, but don't ignore it either. Speak truth, stand tall. And when you wear any uniform, school, job, or military, wear it with honor. The kids clapped. Some cried. One student stood up and said, "You make me proud to be who I am." Marcus smiled. Back at the FBI office, the case was almost ready. Rachel closed the last folder. "Let's move forward," she said. A formal notice was sent. Caroline Whitmore would be charged with filing a false report, public disturbance, and racial discrimination. The district attorney's office was watching closely. So was the country. Inside the FBI building, Agent Rachel Monroe clicked through Caroline Whitmore's digital files. Each click opened a new piece of her past, and each one made the story darker. There were emails, complaints, and anonymous calls made over the last 6 years, always against people of color, always without proof. One case involved a Muslim doctor in Chicago. She had accused him of giving her fake medicine. The hospital later found the complaint was false. The doctor almost lost his license. Another report was against a Latino schoolteacher claiming he looked dangerous during a field trip. The school had to investigate, only to find nothing wrong. Rachel sat back in her chair, her eyes narrowed. "She's not just biased," she said to Agent David Shaw. "She's a repeat offender." David nodded. "And this time she picked the wrong target." Rachel opened a thick file and marked the last page. Recommended: federal charges for repeated false reporting with racial motive. Caroline's last stand at. The same time, Caroline Whitmore sat in her kitchen, phone in hand, scrolling through messages. Most of them filled with hate. Some were worse than hate. Some were the truth. You built your comfort on other people's pain. Your fear almost ruined a hero's life. You're not the victim. You're the problem. Tears filled her eyes. For the first time in years, she didn't feel powerful. She didn't feel right. She felt exposed. And then came the final message. An official email. Federal case opened. You are under investigation. She dropped the phone. "No," she whispered. But there was no stopping it now. Marcus at the veterans event miles away. Marcus Lee stood backstage at a grand hotel in Washington, D.C. The room was full of soldiers, officials, and reporters. The stage had a banner that read, "Veterans of Honor, Strength in Service, Grace in Silence." Marcus wore his dress uniform, the one with the gold buttons and deep blue coat. His medals shined under the lights. But he didn't care about the medals. He cared about the message. A woman announced him. He served with courage overseas. He served with grace in silence. "Please welcome Sergeant Marcus Lee." The room clapped. Some stood. Some wiped tears. Marcus walked slowly to the podium. He looked out at the crowd and took a deep breath. "I didn't come here to talk about war," he began. "I came to talk about peace, the kind that starts in how we treat each other." He paused. "I've faced enemies with guns, but on that plane, I faced something else. Judgment, fear, and hate, all wrapped in a smile." The crowd was silent, but I stayed still, he continued. "Not because I had to, but because I wanted the world to see what I've seen all my life." He looked up. "Sometimes people fear your skin before they know your story. Sometimes they call you dangerous, just for sitting down." He placed his hand on the podium. I didn't raise my voice. "But I hope my silence said everything." The room stood again. Applause filled the hall. His mother, sitting in the front row, wiped her tears with a tissue and smiled with pride. Back at the FBI office, the final case file was ready. Rachel held the signed report in her hands. They were moving forward. Caroline would now face federal charges for false reporting, disruption of public safety, racially motivated harassment. Rachel looked at her partner and said, "It's not just about punishment. It's about setting a line." "A lie shouldn't be allowed to destroy a life," David added. And the truth should be louder than fear. They picked up their coats. It was time to visit Caroline again. This time, not for questions, but for justice, at Caroline's home. Knock came at her door. Caroline opened it slowly. 2 FBI agents stood outside. Rachel showed her badge. "Caroline Whitmore, you are now under federal investigation. You have the right to remain silent." Caroline's mouth dropped open. "You don't understand. I didn't mean it. I was scared." David replied, "You weren't scared of danger. You were scared of difference, and that's not a crime for you to report. It's a crime for us to stop." They gave her the papers. No handcuffs? Yet. But the message was clear. The days of hiding behind false fear were over. Marcus receives a letter back home. Marcus found a letter in his mailbox. It was from a little boy named Samuel from Oregon. "Dear Mr. Marcus, my dad showed me the video of you on the plane. I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to be brave even when people don't treat me nice. Thank you for showing me that quiet can be strong. Your friend, Samuel. Age 9. Marcus smiled. He held the letter close, folded it gently, and placed it inside the photo frame that held his mother's picture. She always told him, "Your strength will never come from loud words, but from quiet truth." The courtroom was quiet. Only the soft shuffle of papers, the hum of air conditioning, and the occasional cough broke the silence. At the center of the room sat Caroline Whitmore, wearing a plain gray suit, a far cry from the expensive clothes she once wore with pride. Her eyes were down. Her hands trembled slightly. She no longer looked powerful. In front of her, the judge looked over the documents, false reports, video evidence, and victim statements. Agent Rachel Monroe sat in the back, watching carefully. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for truth. The charges were read. "Ms. Whitmore," the judge began, "you are charged with falsely reporting a threat, disrupting public peace, and racially motivated harassment." Caroline's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client was merely acting on fear." But the judge didn't flinch. That fear was not based on facts. It was based on color. And that's not a defense. That's discrimination. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "I didn't mean to ruin his life." The judge replied coldly, "But you tried to. And if people on that plane hadn't stood up for him, you might have succeeded." Marcus wasn't in court. He didn't need to be. His silence had already spoken. His story had already been told. Instead, Marcus was at a local youth center, surrounded by teenagers and young kids, talking about self-respect, dignity, and quiet strength. A boy raised his hand. "Sir," the boy asked, "were you scared when that lady said those things to you?" Marcus looked at him kindly. "Yes," he said, "but not scared of her. I was scared that if I said something back, and even something small, as people would believe her lies before my truth." Another kid asked, "So why didn't you yell?" Marcus smiled. "Because not all power is loud. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay calm when someone tries to break you." The room grew quiet. Every kid in that room understood something deep that day. That strength didn't always look like fists or shouting. Sometimes it looked like stillness. Outside the youth center, a local reporter waited for Marcus. She held a microphone in one hand and a notepad in the other. "Sergeant Lee," she said, "do you have anything to say to the woman who tried to harm your reputation?" Marcus paused. He looked up at the sky for a moment. Then he said, "I forgive her." The reporter was surprised. "Even after all that?" He nodded. "I didn't carry anger with me in war, and I won't carry it home. Forgiveness isn't for her. It's for me. I won't let her keep space in my heart." In the courtroom, Caroline was sentenced. Community service hours, mandatory racial bias education, public apology, and a fine for misuse of emergency services. She wasn't going to prison, but her name would never be clean again. The judge looked directly at her. Ms. Whitmore, you tried to destroy a man with a whisper, but it was his silence that destroyed. Your lie. Let that stay with you. As Caroline walked out of the courtroom, reporters surrounded her. What do you say to Sergeant Marcus Lee? She kept her head down, but then, slowly, she turned toward one camera. With tears in her eyes, she said, I was wrong. He didn't deserve what I did. No one does. Online reaction. The world saw the courtroom clips. Some were angry she wasn't jailed. Others said, let her live with her shame. That's punishment too. But one thing was clear. Marcus had won without raising his voice. People made art of him. Murals, t-shirts, quotes. A famous singer wrote a song called Still Seat 14C, named after the place Marcus sat on, the plane. It became a hit overnight. The lyrics said, you never stood up, but you stood tall. In the silence, you spoke for us all. Marcus at home. His mother showed him the song one evening. She played it on her phone, smiling with tears. You've become something more than just my son, she said. You've become a light for others. Marcus looked down, almost embarrassed. I didn't ask for it. You didn't have to, she replied. Sometimes God chooses the quiet ones. 1 year later, the world had moved on, as it always does. New stories took over the headlines. New scandals, new heroes, new heartbreaks. But for Marcus Lee, that flight still lived quietly in his memory, not as a moment of pain, but as a turning point. It didn't break him. It shaped him. A book with no anger, sitting at his kitchen table. Marcus flipped through a printed draft. The title on the front read, Seat 14C, The Power of Silence. By Marcus Lee, it wasn't a book filled with anger. There was no bitterness, no hate. Instead, it was filled with stories of kindness, moments of unfairness, and the lessons he learned through life and war. Each chapter shared something deeper than just what happened on that plane. Chapter 1. Not every battle is loud. Chapter 5. When you're judged before your name. Chapter 8. Forgiveness is freedom. His mother walked into the room and smiled. I still remember when you were a boy, she said. You hated bullies, but you never fought back. You always just looked them in the eyes. Marcus smiled. I guess I'm still doing that. Meanwhile, in a quiet town, Caroline Whitmore lived in a small house now. No gated community, no big garden, no fancy neighbors. After the court case, she had disappeared from public life. Her name had become a warning, a symbol of what fear and lies can do when mixed with hate. She spent most of her days alone, reading, thinking. Her public apology had helped a little, but not much. Some forgave her, others didn't, and truthfully, she didn't blame them. One day she received a package, no return address, just her name, and inside, a single book. It was Marcus's. There was a handwritten note. We're all learning. Some of us just start later than others. ML. She sat in her chair and cried, not because she was sad, but because she finally understood. It wasn't just a book. It was grace. TV interview. 1 year later, a popular talk show host sat across. From Marcus, live on national television. Your story touched millions, she said. You were called a hero. You became a symbol of quiet strength. How does that feel? Marcus shook his head gently. I'm not a hero, he said. I just didn't react the way people expected. The host leaned in. And would you go back and change anything? He thought for a moment. No, he said softly. Because that moment, as painful as it was, helped start a bigger conversation. He looked into the camera. I didn't want revenge. I wanted a world where boys like me don't have to prove they're safe just to exist. School curriculum months. Later, a new classroom module was added to schools in several states. It was called Modern Citizenship, Courage, and Compassion. In one section, students watched the video of Marcus on the plane. Then they answered questions. What does real strength look like? How can fear lead to injustice? What can we learn from silence? Thousands of students across the country now saw Marcus not just as a soldier, but as a lesson in how to respond to hate without becoming it. Letters from strangers. Marcus continued to receive letters from teachers, from parents, from children. One read, "Thank you for showing my son how to be brave without being loud." Another said, "I used to think silence meant weakness, but now I know sometimes it's the strongest answer." One letter stood out. It came from Caroline. It said, "I cannot erase the damage I caused, but I can spend the rest of my life making sure others don't repeat it. I've started volunteering at a local inclusion group. I'm listening now, really listening. Thank you for not turning your back." Marcus folded the letter and placed it inside the book he was writing. She had changed. Maybe not fully, maybe not perfectly, but that was enough.